alaikum and welcome back. The story that we're going to look at the moment is hospital requires NHS to carry a passport or two form of ID. Now, that's an interesting development, isn't it?
It is. It's kind of like, I mean, it was all over the, it's been all over the radio, it's been all over the media, and some people are saying it's a very positive way forward.
How is it positive? Because could you imagine the vulnerable, the elderly people? How many people carry two form of ID with them?
Exactly.
I mean, I know recently in Newham, a Labour member, she used a Tesco club card as a form of ID. Now, do you think she could get away with something like that in the NHS?
Tesco club card?
Yeah, basically, there was like an internal meeting, and it was over Twitter, it was all over social media, it was an article that's saying that she didn't have a form of ID.
That's
so
the only thing she had.
A club card.
Yeah. But then having said that, I think, isn't it 30% of the population don't have a passport, right? So what are they going to do with the 30% that don't have a passport?
Well, it is a two form of ID, and the fact that...
No, a photo ID, because if you say two forms of ID, one has to be a passport. So literally, I think what some of the headlines were, the NHS is going to require that patients bring their passport in, plus an ID with
I mean,
your
I know
address.
the positive side of that was the fact that because with the NHS cuts and all the budget cuts, and the fact that tourists come and use the NHS service, because you don't need to provide anything, so everyone comes and uses the NHS service for free. And I think they were saying taxpayers in the country who are entitled to it are not really benefiting as much because other people are taking it as well and are using it for granted.
No, I agree. I think what they're saying is they're particularly talking about, I guess, people from Europe, because we've had a lot of people come from Europe who are accessing our services, and it's burdened the NHS quite a lot. And I think the whole idea is that if you are coming from Europe, your home country is supposed to foot the bill. So, for example, if we go over to Europe and we use their services, then the UK will be billed. But that hasn't been happening. So what some people are saying is then if people are forced to bring their passport in, then it can be verified, and then the home country will be billed. But then I'm also thinking about huge numbers of students, you know, from Bangladesh, people who might be here.
But they won't be entitled to it because they're not exactly a taxpayer.
Yeah, so I'm just wondering how that's going to work. So what happens? I mean, they're saying it's not going to be for emergency care service. They said for emergency care service, they're not going to have that, but they're talking about other kinds of care.
You are referring to international students, not just students.
I'm just talking about international students, so I'm just wondering what's going to happen. What about people that are not here legally?
But then I think they're paying their medical fees with the visa application, so I think they covered with the visa application.
What, even in the NHS for sort of like accessing the NHS service? I didn't think, I mean, the point is, I think the whole idea of why they're doing it is, I think they've piloted it in Peterborough. So it's actually, at the moment they're doing it, it's not the case that it's just something they're talking about in theory, they're actually doing this. And they're doing it in Peterborough. It has a huge number of immigrants, particularly mostly from the Eastern European countries. And they're saying it's working really well.
But if it's working, why are doctors going against it? I think I read somewhere that the doctors want to boycott this ID scheme.
Yeah, I think, some of the doctors are, because they feel like, because it's sort of like, the idea is, I think doctors don't want to be put in a place where they're having to they've condemned it. I mean, what I'm reading from The Guardian, it says doctors, nurses and NHS managers have condemned government plans to make hospital patients produce their passport before being treated. They're saying it's unworkable. And it's a burden on overworked staff that will not raise the 500 million a year ministers hope. There are also fears that marginalised groups, such as people who are homeless, and 30% of the population who do not have a passport, will find it harder to access care if the policy currently operating at the Peterborough and Stamford hospitals, NHS Foundation, becomes commonplace. So at the moment, it's a pilot.
So there is a raising concerns among doctors, amongst management. It's not exactly a feasible, because I know London attracts a lot of tourists, and it sounds good in theory, everyone should pay and taxpayers pay, therefore we are entitled to it, but at the same time, isn't it wrong? I mean, there are other ways, and the fact that you tell someone to carry two form of ID to go and see a doctor, that's such a bizarre concept. That's not something we do. I mean, one of the best things that UK has is our NHS. It's probably the best in the world at the moment. So now if we are, like, if everyone's being questioned and everyone's being asked to carry ID, isn't that kind of strange?
Yeah, because I guess, I mean, they're under pressure to try and save money in the NHS. And I think one of the areas they tapped into was health tourism, and how people come from abroad, whether it's from Europe or from overseas, and they access our NHS care service, which means that it places a lot of burden on the NHS, and so the Britain is having to foot the bill. So
I mean, I guess it's a fair argument, because taxpayers pay to be looked after for the country, and the fact that if we go abroad, we will have to cough up for them. For if we had to go to the NHS, we would have had to pay. They don't have an NHS system with it, so if we have to go, we have to pay. So I guess if you see it from that perspective, it doesn't sound bad. In theory, it doesn't sound bad, but the practicality of it is a complete different story.
Yeah, because I mean, I'm wondering how it's going to work, and what about people who don't have a passport, or are they? Because then, if it's the case, okay, right, imagine people don't have a passport, are they going to then create a separate ID for people to bring in with them? But then there's cost with that. So they're trying to save money, but then they're going to end up.
I suppose even with the elderly generation as well, a lot of people don't carry a passport. The other form of photo ID is a driving license. How many elderly carry a driving license, or how many have a driving license?
Young people drive. Okay, elderly people.
I know my parents don't have a driving license.
Exactly.
So
and
that's not because they don't drive.
Yeah.
But then it's kind of like it will again affect the Bangladeshi community again.
How do you think it's going to work? Is it the case they're going to sort of ask before you register? It's a case that you have to bring your passport along and then you register. Is that what they mean? And then each time you come,
no. That's what
or do you have to bring your passport each time?
I think they meant each time, because that's the system we have got at the moment. Because before you register with a GP, you show your proof of ID and everything.
Yeah, which you do anyway, right?
Exactly. So that's the system.
But is it the case you need your passport though? I don't think it's.
It's a proof of ID.
Could be anything. It doesn't necessarily need to be a passport, right?
No.
All right. So then I think in this case, what they're saying is they're going to take on additional measures. So it's the case that people will have to bring along the passport.
But then saying that, I know where I've read of cases, I've heard of cases where people use the NHS or you go under somebody else's name. So I think something like...
But then you can't do that if you have the passport,
I
right?
know. So
I think that's what they're trying to do. Oh, so you're saying that where people can't access it if they're not here legally, for example, then they might use one of their relatives' name to access the care. But if you bring in the passport, then that means they must have a system where they check your photo or your passport or something.
I mean, it has pros and cons, if you look at it. But at the moment, I'm just thinking, is it going to cause more of a problem than actually be a solution? Because how many illegal immigrants do you have that come and sort of, because they're scared as it is, so how many of them would really do something? Because I know that if they were, they'll rather stay home, they'll buy medicines off the counter because of their current situation. But this in itself, I think it's going to cause more problems. I mean, I know the opposition weren't very happy with it as well.
Yeah, because I think people are ready. Who's going to police it? Because it's just additional burden, additional work for them. But then I think what it is, I was reading somewhere where they're saying that that actually it's working really well in Peterborough. So, but then that's a small. You're piloting it in a small area. When you're trying to standardize it,
see, they're saying it works. That's the management telling you it works. But in reality, to find out if it really works, how many have done local vox pop? How many have done local interviews with local people to actually realise it actually works?
So it says, as the National Audit Report issued last month said the government paid out 674 million to other European countries for the treatment of Britons abroad, but received only 49 million in return for the NHS treatment of European citizens. So there's like loads.
Yeah, that's like a huge difference.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we'll wait and see what happens. I mean, it's still early days. I mean, we have protests, we have doctors trying to boycott the whole situation, but at the same time, we have positive stories, and there are good, valid reasons why this should take place and this should happen. I know people who are benefiting from it are not the ones who are, some are not the ones who are paying tax to the country. So I think bearing certain things, weighing the pros and cons, I think let's see how it goes, because it's too early to judge. And if it's working in Peterborough, again, we're not sure. This is what the management are saying and what the reality on the ground is. So it's two different stories. I'm sure it's working, and I guess when something is law, regardless of if you like it or not, you have to be, if you're part of the system, you have to follow it. So let's move on to your next story. What do you have today?
What do we have next? Okay. So the next one's sort of really interesting. I don't know what you think, but it's talking about elderly people, and it's saying that 4 out of 5 local council authorities claim they do not have the capacity to care for the older generation.
Oh no!
So in the
It's
UK,
horrible.
we know there's a lot of people, elderly people that either live in their homes, they get care in the homes, or they go into nursing care, and it's just really sad because I think one of the things that's quite interesting. I think some people were saying for the autumn statement, they were hoping that they might actually comment or it might reflect some aspect of that, but they haven't actually talked about social care at all, because you're talking about elderly people, Sabia. You're talking about the people in our society, the elderly people that have worked their whole life, right?
Yeah.
They raise children in this society, and they get to a point in their life where they're vulnerable, and suddenly no one wants to provide that. So, not to say that it is happening, but it's that there isn't enough. They're saying...
Do you know the thing that is mind-boggling for me about this whole situation by elderly care? I think it's recently become a Bengali problem. Before that it wasn't. Before that, not many Bengali parents went to care home. Now they do.
Yeah.
I mean, how do you feel like that? Because I mean, for once, I know I wouldn't want my parents to be in a care home because they've raised us, and it's our job to look after them. The fact that they would go into care home, it's not exactly a thing that I would want. And the fact that, and then some people who are in care home probably don't have kids, or the kids have moved on, whatever reason, there might be valid reason why they put the parents in care home. And now the fact that the government said they don't have enough resource, where does that leave them? They're vulnerable. I mean, I remember sometime in the past, they said prisons has better facility than elderly care home, which is so silly, because these people, these elderly, as you said, are the most vulnerable people in society. They need looking after. They've done their fair share. They pay tax. They worked for the country. They did whatever they could have. And now the fact that they've reached a stage where they're vulnerable and they can't do anything about it, we're turning around and saying, do you know what? We don't have budget. We can't fit you in. How?
No, I agree with you, because I feel that everything that you're saying, I totally agree with you. And I think it's like, I don't know, it's sort of like quite sad, because I think the article here is saying only a third of local authorities said they had enough nursing homes with specialist dementia support. So you've got a huge number of people that are getting older, but they might suffer from dementias, other kind of health problems, and so they need sort of more care, a lot of care. And so at the moment you've got the home care service that sometimes the council, local authority provides, but for some people it might be the case it's not enough. So then the question you asked was, if we're going to take it back to the Bengali community, the Bengali family. In our community, traditionally it's been the case that elderly people stayed with the family and they got the help and support they needed. But in today's world, more and more people you hear that are moving out, and elderly people are on their own, right, at home. So then the question is, so what happens as these people get older, in terms of support and care? So this is where I know in the UK generally the reliance is upon the state to intervene and provide that support. I was listening to ABC radio, and I think someone called in saying that the mother needed sort of specialist support and they couldn't provide that help and support, and they literally had to sell the house she lived in. I think it was about 300k just to provide the care, and that was for about 5 years, because it's quite expensive to provide that care. And it's just quite sad, because family is changing in the same way that the Western society has changed. We know that you had your extended families, then it's become a nuclear family. And for so long within Bangladeshi families, we lived in extended families. But as time wears on, you see more and more people living in nuclear settings, right? Yeah. So then what do you do with elderly people? I mean, we have a lot of respect. I mean, like, from the culture we come from, we have a lot of respect for elderly people. We feel they have a lot of wisdom and there's a place in society for them. We see them as the murabbi within our family. And but then more and more young people are moving out. They're getting married. They're having their own families. And what happens? I mean, who takes care of them? And is it the state? Is it the son? Is it the daughter? What happens?
It's a good question, because with these cards, you won't have many care services available, because if there's no money, who's going to do it for free? If you're own family doesn't look after you, why would someone else do it for you?
Yeah.
Is a big question.
It is hard, because I know that for my mum, like my mum's passed away, but I remember that she lived at home with us. I was, living with her at the time, and we had huge families, my brother, my sisters, everyone came around and did their part.
Yeah, I think that's the beauty of a Bengali
Yeah.
family, because we're still close-knit and there's always a helping hand. But how much of an impact would this have on the Bangladeshi community, do you think?
Because you see that all the time. You see that there's a lot of, like, I've worked in the community, and you see that a lot of families, even though they're living with the elderly, there's a lot of issues. I come across it all the time. And then some families choose to live separately, because as people get older, they need a lot of, I'm not trying to say everybody, but sometimes people need that privacy and that space as well. And sometimes the way that the housing is organised in the UK, as an example, it's the way that the house is organised, it's so small. It's not like in Bangladesh or Middle Eastern countries where the homes are a lot more open and a lot wider. So there's space for different, like people, even if they want to live an extended family. I think it's a lot harder for us in the UK if a lot of Bengali families live in council flats. So imagine how small that council flat is. And sometimes everyone needs their space. The elderly parents need their space, children need their space, the couples need their space. So if you're living in that already overstretched environment, it places a lot of, I don't know, I'm not trying to say one thing is...
I guess we'll see how this plans out, because if they cut the budget, again, the care service isn't going to be there. So it's going to have a huge impact, and it's going to affect them a lot. Who knows, by the time the policy is implemented, it might not be them that is affected. It might be us. We might be the elderly at that time.
Exactly, us.
When it affects.
Yeah.
So
what's going to happen?
In a sense, that policy could, when it's sort of materialised, it could be us lot in that stage of time. So I guess we should put ourselves in the elderly people's position and think, this is us. How would we like to be treated, and what would we want for ourselves? So I think if we put ourselves in our parents' position and see what do we want, because they invested in us, they invested in our future. Everything they did, it was about us. So now it's our turn. But I'm going to leave you on that thought, because there's one story I really wanted to cover.
It was the Cox story, right?
The MP.
And I was sort of watching the news.
I know,
today.
it was today that they actually finally sentenced him
guilty, and I was thinking, it's quite a sad story. She leaves behind 2 children.
Yes, I
people
know.
who might not know about the story, Jo Cox is an MP, and she was murdered by a white supremacist.
Who was from National Front, wasn't he?
So he sort of shot her, and then he stabbed her.
Stabbed her so many times.
Before the Brexit, before the European referendum.
Yeah, that's because she was campaigning for it.
Yeah.
And I think that's something he didn't want her to do.
Yeah.
But regardless of whatever, it doesn't justify what he's done.
She's a strong campaigner on a lot of issues, on minority issues, and she's been sort of quite a strong advocate on a lot of sort of human rights issues and stuff as well. And I think the guy, I know that Thomas Mayer, he was jailed for life basically.
Well, he was an extreme right-wing terrorist, and I don't think there was much emphasizing the fact that he was a right-wing terrorist. I know if the table turned, it would have been a complete different story altogether. But in this case, it took him quite a while for him to be sentenced, and the fact that he didn't say much in his hearing in itself, it just showed
he chose not to, though, Sabia, because what it said is he had the opportunity to, but he chose not to say anything. And it's because apparently when he did stab her, he said this is for Britain, Britain First, and Britain First we know is like a it's a far right organisation. And I was just thinking that, like, and then there's a lot of discussion. I was following the debate on the radio, and a lot of people were saying, well, he doesn't have mental health problems. I mean, I just thought it's interesting because automatically people assume, okay, let's look at his, despite the fact that he's a far right, he's, he follows far right organisation, he's a white supremacist. The first thing that people thought of, okay, let's see if he's got a mental health condition. They looked into it, no, he doesn't.
Yeah.
And then there's like, okay, well, they're trying to, the stuff like trying to figure out why would someone like that do that.
I know,
but
and if that was the other reason, if that was Muslim, first thing is he's a terrorist, and let's find everything else later, or he's guilty, he's a Muslim, oh God. Because as soon as you hear on the media, as soon as they say Muslim, you're like, no, please no. But I think we're coming to the end of the show.
Okay.
So before we end, any final thoughts?
No, I think No, just like thank you for watching, and hopefully we'll come back next week again.
Well, that was from myself, Sabia and Sultana for tonight. Thank you so much for watching us. We'll hope to see you next week, same place, same time. Take care. Assalamu alaikum. No.
Yeah.
But I think we're coming to the end of the show.
Okay.
So before we end, any final thoughts?
No, I think no, just like thank you for watching, and hopefully we'll come back next week again.
Well, that was from myself, Sabia and Sultana for tonight. Thank you so much for watching us. We'll hope to see you next week, same place, same time. Take care. Assalamu alaikum.